the exposure that we got from YC to be introduced to these investors was a huge boon for us. I think that we would have found them eventually, but I think we would have needed much more traction. Like I said, at demo day, we had 2 pilots, and I think the value of those 2 contracts, if they converted, was something like $30,000
Yeah.
ARR, which is like nowhere near enough to raise a seed round. But the fact that we had this essentially stamp of approval that we were the technical team to build this really large product was what pushed a lot of these investors who wanted to see this product exist. It pushed them to believe that we were the team to build it. And I think it would have taken us much longer to prove that without YC.
Are you applying to Y Combinator? Before you hit submit on your application, you need to hear this. The acceptance rate is under 1%, and most founders get rejected without ever knowing what went wrong. That's why we built YC Roaster, a completely free tool where you submit your application and get brutally honest feedback from a real YC alumni. AI screens it first, then actual founders who've been through the program tell you exactly what to fix. No cost, no catch, it's completely free, just a better application for you. Go to ycroaster.com before the next deadline, link in the description. Welcome back to the Lobster Talks, where I bring you the very best YC founders in the world. Today we're going to talk about EdTech. Private equity just spent $5.5 billion to buy the software that runs 70% of American schools. In the past, these giants in education were safe because their software was too entrenched to replace. Are they still today? Well, AI just changed everything. And so today's guest is building the school OS from the ground up in the AI era. I'm very, very happy and excited to be joined by Noah from Scout. Noah, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Super excited to be here.
All right. So I hope I did justice to what you're trying to accomplish, but in your own words, please tell us what you're building, why this is super important.
Yeah. So we are building Scout, an AI native student information system. So the student information system is kind of the central nervous system of school operations. So it houses all student data, demographics, attendance, grades, everything that needs to be essentially sent to the government. And then all of that information gets sent off to all of the different platforms that schools are using for operations, for academics. And so your student information system becomes really entrenched in all of your kind of technology stack.
You know, I was looking at what you built, researching this, preparing for the episode, and the timing is just crazy. So if my information is correct, in October 2024, Bain closes $5.6 billion deal to acquire PowerSchool, and PowerSchool is the giant here. And you go through YC in winter 2025, which is January through March. So literally 3 months after this deal closes, you go through YC. Talk to me about the timing. Was this when you saw this in October that you realized, okay, there's a huge opportunity here? How did you think of this deal and how it impacted what you started?
Yeah, I don't think it was premeditated. I think, in October of 2024, we were still, me and my co-founder Max were still figuring out what we wanted to build in education. We knew that we wanted to build something in education. We had been working nights and weekends all of 2024, just kind of iterating, pivoting. And at the time, we were building this kind of data analytics layer that was plugging into all of your different data sources, building this kind of holistic student profile. And the idea was, we had spoken to so many teachers, so many administrators who told us that they just absolutely hated their student information system. And I think it was something we had heard so consistently, and it felt like such a good fit for us to be building based on kind of our backgrounds. And we realized, let's use this kind of data analytics layer as a stepping stone, as a wedge to build the student information system, sit on top of all of your kind of pieces of technology, and then eventually build out all the pieces of the SIS so that we could kind of, steal eyeballs and then eventually replace it. And I think, that moment where there was this just massive acquisition, it was more of validation for us that this is a really important market, but also private equity is just drawn to it because it is so sticky, it's so hard to switch.
Yeah.
And you end up with these companies that have these massive sales teams. It becomes a really strong kind of sales motion. And then you have a tiny little engineering team that's kind of relegated to the second level. And they are just like maintaining this product, not really making improvements. And we realized like there was a huge opportunity to just make a product that people actually loved using. And private equity kind of rolling up all of these companies made it much more likely that nobody else was going to do it.
It is super interesting. First, I want to, we have a lot of founders watching this show and people who want to apply to YC who come here to listen from the source, from people who've made it. And this is so interesting. I want to repeat what you said. You just talk to the users. There's a big old clunky system that they hate. This is exactly what YC advises you to do. Just talk to your users. And we're going to talk about how AI is rewriting all the rules, but there's an opportunity with pretty much any piece of software in the world today, especially regardless of AI, actually, if it's old and clunky and no one likes using it and it's from 20 years ago. So that's super, super interesting if you're a founder out there. And this works with anything. YC has said, go find friends from college or colleagues or whatever and go in whatever big company they are, sit next to them for one day and look at their screen and what they're doing. And so many of them, if not all of them, are using old, outdated, clunky software and just say, hey, could I not just make this better with AI? So anyway, worth repeating, and thank you for that. Now I want to double down on something else that you said. It is very hard to rip off. It is very sticky, which makes it attractive to PE. It makes it also, and I'm sure you've thought of that. I'm not, you're not discovering it. It makes it harder for you to then come in and compete. How do you mitigate for that? Of course, I'm guessing you're trying to build just way superior software, but I'm also guessing, sadly, oftentimes it's not enough. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that historically it has been really hard to sell a student information system, especially, in the past 20 years, all of them have been roughly the same, right? The value prop is roughly the same for every single one. And there wasn't some sort of technological catalyst where you could build a product that was so superior that it would overcome that friction, those switching costs. So I think that part of it is just like now is the first time since student information systems switched from being server-based architecture to web-based architecture, that we have this kind of technological catalyst where we can go to a school or a district and say like we are going to deliver so much value to your organization that it is worth that year of pain, and the value is so great that they they recognize that, right? Not always. A lot of the times they're like, it's not the right timing. We need a little more time. We need to do this over the course of 2 years, 3 years. But I think for a product that you would expect to have such low kind of switching, we have pretty high conversion rates. And part of the reason is that we have focused on a really small niche of the market, these online hybrid charter schools in California. And they have these very specific kind of compliance requirements. And when we were kind of first building the student information system, we built everything that you need in a student information system, but also we used AI to basically solve compliance for them. And by going to them and saying, we're just going to take compliance entirely off of your plate and we offer everything that your student information system does, then that was enough of a catalyst. The pain was so deep that it kind of overcame that friction, those switching costs.
So many great things to unpack here. I love what you said. You got to make your product so good that at the end, I'm trying to think of another example, but there are companies that just the product is just so good, people just cannot resist switching. That's the idea. So an amazing way to win, right? And I wanted to touch as well on targeting a smaller niche. It's exactly what you said. Is the market is huge. We cannot serve everyone. Um, is this how do it's a typical YC story of, hey, find a wedge, find a small entry point, and then you'll expand into other markets, bigger markets. How do you think about that? Because what you're targeting is online schools in California, if I'm not mistaken. So it is a very small subset of the market. Even if you take the global market, of course, but even in the US market, California is just one out of 50 states, and then it's only the online school. So of course you want to dominate that, and I'm guessing then expand. How do you think of the expansion part? Maybe you're not there yet, but I'm sure you're thinking about it, and I'm sure you're probably preparing today. What's your thinking there? Because your investors, and we're going to talk about your investors in a minute, they don't want you to be just for online schools in California. They want you to build a unicorn, a huge company. So yeah, tell me about your thinking around all of that.
Yeah. So, going back to this data analytics product that we were building originally, we were trying to find any school in America that needed it. And we were going to these national conferences. We were talking to people from all over the country, trying to get them to buy it. And, blasting out emails, like thousands and thousands of emails to get anybody to just give us feedback on the product, not even, take a demo, but just give us feedback. And the one school that responded to us that was like, actually, we do want to see a demo, was one of these online schools in California. And, this was actually 2 weeks into YC. We had gone to this conference. I guess we were already in talks with this online school in California. And we asked them, you know, why doesn't your student information system handle all of this? They didn't really care about the data analytics. They cared about the fact that they had 5,000 students, they were in 50 different online platforms, and they just needed to be able to track what the students were doing in order to, fulfill all of these compliance requirements. And so, we asked them, why doesn't your system do this? And they were like, I have no idea. You tell me. And we realized that this market had only one kind of monopoly player because there were so many kind of unique niche needs that the big players like PowerSchool they weren't really serving this market. And it was around the time where we were realizing that, we were 2 weeks into YC, we were realizing that we need to narrow down. We need to really, if we're going to build this important product, then we need to find the people who need it. And it's very much like the classic like sell to startups kind of advice, where it's like the big market doesn't need this. The big players, the big LA Unified School District, New York City, they don't need this product. But if you sell to the innovators in your space, then everybody will need this product eventually. And so that is part of our expansion strategy. We were building this really innovative product that the traditional schools didn't need because they see their students every single day. The kids might be doing a little bit of work online at home, in class here or there, but they get enough of a pulse on how their students are performing that they don't need this like complex kind of data analytics product to figure out how their students are doing. But these online schools really need that because they don't see their students every day. They see them maybe once a month. They do a 1 hour kind of Zoom meeting, and then the rest of the time the student is at home, they're working online. And so we realized like these are the innovative schools. These are like the startups of education. They've been around for 20 years. They've been mostly online the past 10 years or so. And part of the expansion strategy is that they are kind of taking enrollment away from the traditional schools. They are delivering a product to families, to parents, to students that the families want, and they're kind of voting with their feet. They're moving to these schools while the districts are kind of losing enrollment. And we kind of realize part of the expansion strategy is that the districts are going to start to need to compete with these online hybrid schools to be able to offer this kind of more innovative, flexible approach of education. And they will need a student information system that kind of understands how that form of education operates. So I think part of it is just like a bet on what the future of education is, and that this market that is already growing rapidly in California is really going to take off, and what education looks like will be closer to this than it is to, the traditional form of education. Part of it is just like a lot of what what a student information system does, a lot of the parts of our product, like enrollment or reporting data to the government, these are things that traditional schools or schools in other states all need to do. And if we can make kind of the state of the art, world class version of those, it might be enough to get those kind of traditional districts to switch as well.
It is super interesting. It's really not what I expected. Instead of, I thought, and I love it. It's, a very pleasant surprise. Instead of telling me, hey, this is just a wedge and we're going to go to the big old school schools, old school is a weird thing to say, but you're telling me we're actually going where the puck is going, which is the old schools are just going to disappear and the new system of education is going to be those. So it is exactly sort of the startup play. Like instead of selling to, I don't know, Wells Fargo and Bank of America, you sell to Mercury and Brex, and they're actually just taking the entire market. And this is how you win. I love this. Did not expect that. That's really cool. And as a parent, I agree. Like I'm not very happy with traditional schools. I don't know if my kids are too young, but I don't know if they will go to traditional school. It's something we're thinking about a lot with my wife. So I think you're right. Maybe visionary. Like I mean, you're not the inventor of this idea, but probably not a lot of people realize that traditional schools are probably either disappearing or at least changing, evolving a lot in the future. So just amazing insight. So, actually, I wanted to ask you because you've mentioned several times schools in California, and we're doing this recording online because you're in New York. So, how come? Why are you in New York if you're selling in California? What's the reason here?
Yeah, so my co-founder and I, we met on the first day of high school. We grew up in New York City, and we've been in New York pretty much our whole lives. I had a small stint in DC in between, but I think that I we just have a very strong personal belief that your support network is really important as a founder. And I think there are a lot of people who, move to San Francisco, they want to start their startup, they want to go heads down. I think that San Francisco has really, really exceptional technical talent. And if you're building a very deeply technical product or you're selling, particularly to startups that are, highly concentrated in San Francisco, then being in San Francisco is a great option. I think that being in New York is just like having our family here is a huge boon to be able to do this really hard thing, this really like emotionally straining thing. There are so many ups and downs, and we get to share all
Oh
of them
yes.
with our families. And so I think that there are benefits to wherever you pick. There are benefits and drawbacks, but I also think like we are selling to California schools today. I spend probably half of my time in California just traveling back and forth to different schools and conferences. But eventually we'll be selling to schools in New York and Texas and Florida and Oregon and maybe even out of the country. And so I think just in terms of like long-term thinking, being in San Francisco, like it might have helped us a little bit in certain ways here or there for the short term when we're just selling to California. But eventually, it doesn't really matter where the company is headquartered because we're going to have to, at least the sales team is going to have to be distributed across the country to be able to like really service the customers in that kind of region.
And you're selling to online schools. So if there's one customer that believes in online, digital everything, it should be them. It is
Yeah.
interesting. I'm from Europe. I moved to San Francisco. I have this sort of argument all the time. I was traveling to London and I met a company there, a YC company. I was like, "What are you doing in London?" And this one I actually never heard. Our families are here. We want to make our life easier. I think it is actually smart. I still would push you to go to San Francisco like I push everyone else. But yeah, it is very tough being a founder. If having your family there makes it easier, I guess it's a very valid point. I'm glad we got it out of the way. But you are coming to California so often. So next time we're gonna record in SF in the studio.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's
Sorry.
talk a little bit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
One thing that I would add is we grew up in New York. we went to Stuyvesant High School, which is a really kind of prestigious high school in New York, produces a lot of kind of founder types, engineers. If I had to guess, like 50% of people who come out of that high school are engineers, and there's this huge network
Wow.
of really talented, really smart engineers coming out of this school. And our first founding engineer was one of our close friends from high school, really talented engineer. We're kind of constantly, looking at that network. And so I think just like a big advantage that we have is access to this kind of technical network and some clout within the network because we are part of it. That is an advantage. Whereas if you're in San Francisco, you're competing with all of the other AI startups. Some of them are growing 100x year over year, and EdTech is a much kind of slower burn. The early years are much slower, and the rapid growth comes much later. And so, convincing engineers who are moving to San Francisco because they're highly technical, they're really excited about working on really difficult technical problems, becomes much harder. Whereas in New York, I find that a lot of engineers are more kind of mission driven. They're more interested in joining a company that feels really meaningful to them. And so, by being here, we actually have access to better technical talent than we would have access to in San Francisco.
That's really cool from the school. I like that. And by the way, New York, I've been very impressed as a city. Just there's a lot of YC founders moving to New York. I'm always surprised. I'm always thinking, why not stay in SF? But New York, I'm even thinking, is New York going to become the actual default place? Is New York going to replace SF? I think we're very far from that. There are a lot of people moving to SF, but there are also a lot of people moving to New York. So it is really interesting, something I've been paying attention to, so it's worth talking about and very interesting. Thank you for that. Let's sort of go back, if you don't mind, to a little bit of the founder story. I want to go back to your origins. I want to touch on two things. I want to touch on YC. This is the YC podcast. We do talk about YC a lot. So I absolutely want to talk about YC. But, and this is a teaser for listeners to just say, before, I want to talk about your previous founder story, and especially the sneakers bot. You built a sneaker bot, right? So many great founders that I see, like literally dozens, built sneaker bots. So what is it? Tell me now, because I've been wanting to ask that question for months. What is it with sneaker bots that all of them end up at YC? What's the story behind it? Why is it so popular? Why is it? To me, it's becoming a token of great founders. I should start the sneaker bot fund and only invest in founders who started sneaker bot. I don't know. Tell me what's the thing behind it?
Yeah, so in high school, I wanted to make some money on the side, right? I had done some like service type jobs. I didn't like really enjoy doing that, but I had friends who were reselling sneakers, and so sometimes they would buy them, on the internet. Sometimes they would buy them from somebody else and flip them to another person, and so I started kind of trying to do this, and I realized that by they were selling out so quickly that the only way that you could actually get the bots was writing a script that would buy it for you. And so actually my co-founder and I were building those together in high school just for ourselves to be able to make some money on the side. And we started kind of getting pretty good at it. But I think it was purely driven by just like we wanted some cash on the side to, buy some clothes and go to the movies and stuff like that. And then, at a certain point, once we started getting really good at it, I realized that it wasn't really sustainable for me to be doing it myself. I was constrained by just the amount of money that I had to put into how many shoes I could buy, as opposed to how many shoes I could buy. That was no longer the constraint. And so, once I started college, I realized I could turn this kind of program that I had written into more of like a SaaS business where I was selling this to other sneaker resellers to be able to, give them the leverage to buy a bunch of sneakers. But I think I was just interested in like doing something difficult, doing something that was like this was the fun thing to me in college. And I kind of saw college as this like side quest where I just like had to go to class. I was going to finish my degree, but like the main quest during college was I was building a sneaker bot and I was having a ton of fun like staying up. It was mostly focused on Supreme, actually, which is this kind of like skater clothing brand.
Which is what you're wearing right now, no?
It is actually, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and
So
so
you're still in touch with the roots.
I'm still in touch with the roots. Yeah, I actually got this one using my own bot back like freshman year of college.
That's really cool. That's really cool. You
Yeah.
know, I it's so interesting because I there's a question on the YC application. YC is notorious for having very young founders. It's not only young founders. There's 35 plus year old founders in YC as well, but most of them are 18 to 25. That's a majority. And so there's most of them are very young. You haven't had time to do much in your life because you're just a kid and studying. But there's this question: when or how did you hack a system to your advantage? And so this is a perfect example. To me, it's almost like a revenge of the geeks, and I'm saying this in the most positive way possible. It's when the I'm a geek, and you're a geek, obviously, and a lot of listeners here I'm sure are geeks. When you see a system of like, hey, people are buying and selling those shoes, but they're doing it manually, and you're like, I actually can do better. I can do this better. I have an idea. I have a system. I'm going to use code or computers or whatever to create something better and to turn this into an actual business. So this is exactly the thing, how you hacked the system to your advantage. Was this, by the way, what you answered in the question in your YC application, your sneaker bot?
Uh, I actually don't think so. I think that
Interesting.
because the question was worded in a way where it was like a non-computer system, and
Oh, you're right.
I didn't even
You're right.
think this was like that crazy of a thing that I had done. It was just like something I had done throughout high school and college. But I think I gave two answers. One was that when I was in high school, we weren't allowed to sell things on school grounds, and people like didn't like the breakfast that was at high school. So I was making like waffles in the school, and then I would like collect money off of school grounds and then give out free waffles at the school. That was one of
Oh.
the two answers. The other answer was that when I was 5 years old, um, I I had lost my first tooth, and my parents had given me the tooth fairy money that I very quickly caught on that it was my parents giving me the money and not the tooth fairy. So I made a deal with them. We called it like the tooth bond, where they just gave me all the money up front for all of my teeth, and then I just told them that I would give them my teeth when they fell out.
Wow, that's awesome. Good. Then you put the money in the S&P 500, get a yield, and you're started. You're off to the races. Very Warren Buffett. Okay, no, you're right. It is a non-computer hack because they don't want. Okay, I really like the waffle one. Maybe I should ask this. This question is so interesting and sort of revealing of people's personalities that I should ask it on all of my episodes.
Yeah,
But it is interesting. We're starting to paint a picture here of, hey, you are hacking the don't sell in school on school grounds rule. You're hacking the sneakers bot, and again, sneakers bot. I've seen so many of them with great founders. So then you make it in YC. Um, you know, Tell me a little bit of the story. You get in YC. You're freshly new with this idea. It's been a couple months, if I can remember the timeline correctly, with your co-founder. Tell me what it's like. What does YC bring you? How does YC changes your course at that point, at the beginning of YC?
yeah. I remember the first day of YC. I mean, I was so excited to go to YC. I before YC, I was working at Slash, which was a summer 21 company, and I was one of the first engineers right after they finished YC. I heard all the great stories about it. I spent 3 years there, and that company is doing amazingly well. And a lot of it is because they really instilled the YC learnings in all of us. So I was so excited to go to YC, and I was also really nervous. I had never really like been around this culture during, when I was working at Slash. I was still living in DC at the time, and I was working remotely, and I would go for like a week once a month, but I wasn't really ingrained in this like real kind of startup grind culture. And so I was really nervous. It felt like I was meeting like a lot of my heroes, and there was this lineup for the first 3 days. It was like Patrick Collison, Brian Chesky, Brian Armstrong, all of the great YC founders.
Oh
and
yeah.
and then you get there the first day, and you have to go up and you have to give your like 2 sentence pitch of what you're working on. And this was something that I really struggled with. I used to get really nervous going on stage and talking to people, and I wasn't prepared at all. I didn't even know that we were going to do this, and so I get on stage and I totally have like no idea what I'm saying. I was super nervous. You could really tell. And I get off stage and I was like, "Oh my god, that was so horrible." And a lot
Yeah.
of it was because I got in and I felt like I didn't deserve it. I felt like
Imposter syndrome. Yeah,
I
of
had this
course.
I had
Yeah.
this intense imposter syndrome where I was like, these people are building nuclear reactors and semiconductors, and they're 18 years old, and they're building, I don't know, pesticides factories, and and I was like, I don't belong here. And so I was so nervous presenting to these, everybody in our batch. And 2 days later, uh, by the end of this period where it was, 3 days of just kind of meeting everybody in the batch and spending a lot of time, what I came to realize, especially like hearing these legendary founders speak, was that all of these people, everybody who made it into YC was just like another person, and like really smart people, but no smarter than I was. And by the end of that, it like totally shifted my perspective, where it was like, I'm no longer coming to this feeling like an imposter. I'm coming to it feeling like I am one of the people who could be that, unicorn, that
Wow.
5% unicorn that could come out of the batch. Um, just
Six
because
and a half. 6.5%.
there you go. Yeah, it totally shifted my perspective, and I think that's the point of YC. It brings you in and it makes you realize like you're here for a reason. You're here because you are an exceptional engineer or an exceptional product thinker or whatever your role,
Founder. An exceptional founder.
exceptional founder. And you, just as much as anybody else who is here, you have this opportunity to build this great thing, and the fundamentals of how you build this great thing are actually relatively simple. You just have to work really hard, you have to talk to your users, you have to iterate, you have to launch, you have to do all of these things that are like, when you say it out loud, it sounds really formulaic, and sometimes it
Yeah.
feels really formulaic, but it works.
It's just that. It's crazy. I've heard this story countless times of exactly what you said, which is you meet those great, great, great founders, Brian Chesky, Patrick Collison, Brian Armstrong, all of them. Brian Chesky comes every time. I think Patrick Collison comes almost every time as well. And everyone tells me the same thing: is you realize they're regular human beings.
Yeah.
And so YC is so, I mean, it's very, very a genius of them or smart of them to realize, hey, we're such an institution now. People coming in might have imposter syndrome, like, oh my God, I'm in YC. We're gonna sort of diffuse it day one and just make everyone, feel at ease. I very often think of this sentence of this thing that's don't meet your heroes, because it is when you meet your heroes, you can only be disappointed because you realize they're regular humans. You're painting them as superhumans in your head, and you realize they're just normal people. In this case, this is what makes it effective: is do meet your heroes and almost be disappointed that they're just regular people, but it empowers you to realize they're regular people, I'm a regular guy. That's good. We're the same, cut from the same cloth. I can do it. So that's awesome. Okay, tell me. I want to talk about the post YC. Obviously, that's super interesting and often left out. But briefly, or not briefly, we have time. But talk to me about the during YC. How is it? What? Tell me some non obvious things. Yeah, you remember from that time that you did not expect? How did it change your company, your trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one advice that we consistently ignored and it helped us, and not just from YC, but from other founders, from general VC advice, was build a small product and then build it for a really large market and then grow the product over time. And I think we realized really quickly that, that story of we went to that conference 2 weeks into the batch, we we realized really quickly that it doesn't work in education, that the big product is the thing that gets people to switch, right? The schools don't want to invest all this time in a little product. They get pitches from all these little apps here and there that are saying, we're going to help your school improve student outcomes. And so we realized like the only way that we're going to get a school to switch is if we pitch this big vision to them. We are trying to transform your operations, and we're starting with this compliance piece, but a year from now, we're going to have the entire suite. And I think that YC really empowered us to do that. We spoke to a lot of former EdTech founders who had gone through YC. We spoke to, Tyler Bosmany is one of the partners at YC. And all
For the audience, just to so he's the founder of Clover, who went through YC in 2012 and got acquired in the 2020s. Big exit and outcome, which is an EdTech, and so now he's a YC partner. Just for everyone to understand what you're talking about. Sorry, keep going.
And the thing that we realized was that we needed to do this big thing in order to succeed, and we needed to do it from day one, or we would never get there. Because every EdTech founder says, one day I'm going to build the student information system, but they never get there because there's all these little fractals that you can get stuck in EdTech. Because every school has all these tiny requests, and you feel like you need to fulfill all of them, and so you just never kind of grow the product. And so we shifted our strategy to, build this big product for this small niche and then grow the market over time, as opposed to growing the small product into a big product for the whole market. And I thought we would get a ton of pushback on that, because the traditional advice is just like build a small product, launch it, get some traction, and then, just increase the size of the product over time. But we spoke to a bunch of, former EdTech founders. We spoke to Tyler. We spoke to our group partner, Aaron, and all of them were like, do it. Like, do the crazy ambitious thing, because, there were companies building semiconductors and nuclear reactors and all these other crazy ambitious things that were going to take a bunch of time. And we were thrown into this environment where ambition was rewarded, ambition was encouraged. And if we could, pitch this ambitious vision, then people were on board with that. And it really helped us like kind of clarify our vision for this company, and also clarify it in selling to schools, because schools buy into this vision that we are going to deliver this massive product that is totally, life-changing for the thousands of teachers and administrators who need it.
That's awesome. You're in a place where ambition is rewarded, and it's good on YC. They have the typical advice, but sometimes it doesn't apply. I think of this a lot as an investor. I invest in YC companies. I have a set of rules. They're very specific. I'm very peculiar about what I invest into, and it's working out great for me. But there are times that I want to be able to break my own rules, and I have in the past. And it's always weird, because you're thinking, hey, I promised something to my investors. I told them, hey, this is exactly what I'm going to do, and they trust me. And so you have to sort of think, if I break the rules, I want to know exactly why I'm doing it, and I want to be able to justify it to them, and I want them to be happy that I broke the rule. And they are. We have some of our best investments that actually were so out there, so crazy, so something, that they didn't follow all of my rules. And so you have to break the rules sometimes. Very good on YC for pushing you to do this. Love that story. I have so many questions on how do you find which features to build and not for the schools that ask you everything. But we before we run out of time, that's going to be for a second episode in person in San Francisco. for this one, I want to talk about the Post YC. I believe, I really believe Post YC, you're under the spotlight for 3 months. Everyone talks about you. There's demo day. There's news articles. Here's the favorite of the batch. Blah blah blah, and then that's it. You're gone. And it is what it is. It's not a criticism of YC. Like, they have the new batch to focus on. I also really want this podcast to be like, hey, the 2 years after YC, this is a platform for founders to come and talk about what they're building, and that's what we're doing now. You've said, I think you've published that there's a 35% productivity dip after YC. I'm actually surprised it's only 35% because you're into this crazy world environment. Things are moving so fast. It's like 24/7, literally 7 days a week until midnight, 2 a.m. And then you wake up at 6 and you start again. And then poof, it all stops. What, tell me what this is like. How do you mitigate from that? How do you keep going when suddenly everything sort of stops and slows down, but you have to keep moving as fast as possible? What is this like? What have you done? How did you go through it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, YC really is like that. Like, you go to bed at 2 a.m., you get up at 6 a.m., you do it for 7 days a week. And, I didn't take a single day off during the batch. I think my
Of
co-founder
course. Yeah.
took half a day off to go on a hike. And
And thinking about your business
right.
the whole hike anyway. So
And it is absolutely exhausting. And by the end of it, it's just like, not, it's not a sustainable way to run a business, right? And one of the things that YC preaches a lot is thinking about the really long term, right? If you can have a 15-year time horizon, or 20 or even more, then you're going to beat all of your competitors who are aiming for that 5-year exit. And so there was a huge slump after the batch. Part of it was just like, we needed to take 3 days off to breathe. But it's just not sustainable to build a company that is working 7 days a week, 18 plus hours a day. And so I think part of it was just like accepting that this was this. It's like when the plane goes really, really fast at the beginning, to be able to get that lift to get off the ground. Like, that is what we were doing for those 3 months. But once you're in the air, yeah, you need to keep climbing, but you're no longer going at this insane speed to get off the ground. Right. And so I think it
I
was,
actually wait. I actually think this is in terms of avionics. I actually think this is wrong. I think you're going faster when you're flying. Someone in the comments who knows planes, tell us. I think you're going. Actually, you're accelerating more at the beginning, but actually, when you're flying, I think you're going even faster. I understand the image, though. Sorry, keep
yeah.
going.
Well, this is why I'm not a
A pilot, yeah.
yeah.
No, me neither. I believe someone in the comments will tell us. Anyway, no, I understand. Yeah, it's actually a great image. You have the acceleration and the takeoff, and then once you're in the air, you're in the air. You're flying. Yeah. Sorry, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, afterwards, I think we started to shift our mindset from what do we need to do to get our first customer. And by the end of YC, we had 2 pilots. That was it. But we knew that these pilots were going to work out. We had pitched them this vision and they were so bought in. And we started to like pick up more pilots. I think, a month later we had 5 pilots. These are, pretty big enterprise contracts. And then all 5 of them converted 2 months later to annual contracts. And at that point, it was like, we just had all of this stuff that we had to build, and we had extreme deadlines for everything. And after this like very short break where we were like, okay, what do we do? Then it was no longer driven by this kind of artificial, you have 3 months and then there's demo day and you need to have traction by demo day. It was driven by like, this is what customers need, this is what the business needs in order for us to keep the flywheel going, in order to make these customers happy so that they refer all of their friends. And so a lot of it was just like a shift in how we think about what drives the day to day. But also, like, it was a shift from, we're trying to get the plane off the ground to we're trying to build this 15-year plus, like, sustainable business. And how do we do that in a way that doesn't cause us to burn out in 2 months because we're just working 7 days a week until 2 a.m. every day? And sometimes there are periods where we have to do that, where it's like, if we don't work 7 days a week for the next 3 weeks, then we're not going to get this thing out. And there's a state government deadline that
Yeah.
we need to get this thing out by. but kind of taking the foot off of the gas at times gives you the space when you really need to go really hard and not burn out.
It is, to me at least, such a fascinating topic of, I'm building this VC, this firm for the next 20 years, just like a founder. And so you have to not burn out. You have to go fast. And that's the beauty of SF as well. And New York, I'm sure, is the same. I know for a fact, New York is actually even faster than SF. Just gives you this energy like, oh my God, we got to go, got to go. Something I really love is just sort of manufacture a new deadline by promising something to your customers. You say, hey, YC is done. We don't have any pressure. Well, let me just tell my customers this is going to be done in 2 months. And now you have a new deadline. So something for founders to think about, because a lot of them are wondering, how do I keep the fire alive after YC? And it's not easy, to be honest. But this is a great idea. Last thing I wanted to ask you so many more things, but we will run out of time. So last question for today. The investors. You end up with probably a dream cap table or dream investors for this company. You have EdTech sort of giants, angels, and investors who've built exactly in the, like. Tell me if I'm wrong. It's sort of the dream, the investors that you have on your cap table for this particular project. My question to you is, would that cap table with those investors have been possible, would have invested in you without YC, in your opinion?
I don't I don't think so. I mean, I think that the exposure that we got from YC to be introduced to these investors was a huge boon for us. I think that we would have found them eventually, but I think we would have needed much more traction. Like I said, at demo day, we had 2 pilots, and I think like the value of those 2 contracts, if they converted, was something like $30,000
Yeah.
ARR, which is like nowhere near enough to raise a seed round, right? But the the fact that we had this essentially stamp of approval that
Mm.
we were the technical team to build this really large product was what pushed, you know, a lot of these investors who wanted to see this product exist, but it pushed them to believe that we were the team to build it. And I think, it would have taken us much longer to prove that without YC.
That's really cool. The YC stamp of approval. Okay. Just rapid fire, sort of yes, no, but you can give an. There's just one, so take your time to answer. In 5 years, do you think PowerSchool still exists as a standalone company?
I think in 5 years, yes. I think it will be on the decline at that point. They have 70% or something market share, so it's a lot of these are like 7-year contracts. So
Wow.
by definition, they will be serving those contracts 5 years from now. But I think that it is they are on the classic private equity kind of cut headcount, make a worse product, lose revenue, cut more headcount, kind of downward spiral.
That's your opportunity. Thank you so much. That was awesome, Noah. For listeners, if they want to find you, follow what you're building, what's the best place online?
Yeah, mostly LinkedIn is where I post like real professional content about business updates. I also post on my Twitter, but it's mostly random thoughts that pop into my head.
That's awesome. That's what it's for. LinkedIn for the pro and X for the random. All right, that was a blast. Thank you so much for joining. To our listeners, if you're still here, and you should, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel. On YouTube, you can actually see us. If you're on your favorite podcast platform, leave us a 5-star review. It really does help. And I'll see you next week with another amazing YC founder. Thank you, Noah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Gabriel.